That's a really good question. We'll just figure that one out on the fly.
Yeah, we always do.
You can't have too much preparation for these things because, well, that was actually one of the things. So we'll go here just like really quickly, and people listening may get angry, but you've seen like the whole Joe Rogan, Spotify, like everyone's calling for Joe Rogan to be canceled type stuff.
Oh, is that right? I don't know anything about anything.
I don't really pay a ton of attention to it. I just have I have one key podcast a week I listen to that like debriefs me on everything that's happened the previous week. It's great. And so they were talking about how there's been this big call to cancel Joe Rogan and how he kind of like came out with like essentially just a fake, like a fake apology this past week. He's like, yeah, like, I don't know if you guys take me seriously. Like, I'm a fucking comedian. He's like, yeah, I don't even prepare for these episodes. He gets like 11 million hits a month. I think he gets 11 million downloads a week.
Unreal.
Yeah, nuts. For the dude that used to do Fear Factor.
Dude. Yeah, he's been around for so long. It's like, Joe Rogan, he's always been around. It's kind of wild.
Bro, that's who you need to go train down there. He's in Austin now, and I'm 100% positive he's probably not doing very good training from the things that I see floating around in the conversations that he has with other people. And I'm like, yo, you need to get hooked up with my man Ryan and get we can fill out the body to match your head size.
I know. That's what I was going to say. I think that my neck is too small for him. I don't think he would ever take me seriously. So I'm not doing neck training. I know Tom Segura's down here and Joe Rogan. I'll train both of them if they are interested. So you guys are listening to the podcast. I'm sure they are.
Yeah, they're weekly listeners.
Yeah,
Elon Musk. We could throw Elon Musk in there for you as well. I think could be a really good option.
Yeah, I've heard he's got some money that he could spend on training for sure.
Yeah, I think that your hourly rate would be safe. I think he'd be okay.
Yeah, probably not going to get a whole lot of objections to the rate from any of those guys. Yeah. No, I think that's a good plan. I think actually probably the best approach there is it would probably just be go to their Instagrams directly and just pester them. Yeah.
Just tweet at them a lot. Elon's really active on Twitter. Yeah, you can go on there.
I think I could actually take a jet ski to Joe Rogan's house. I'm pretty sure he lives on Lake Austin or Lake Travis or something like that. I could probably just pull up in his backyard.
I think you should just pull up and then just like go through poses.
Yeah.
Until he like comes out to have a conversation with you.
This is my interview. You didn't know that you had one with me, but
I'm here to save your gains.
Yeah. This is what you want. Yeah. Hey, I don't pay attention at all to anything that's going on, but it's kind of I'm actually surprised to just hear that now because I know that he kind of just talks about whatever the hell he wants to talk about. So which I totally respect. So I'm surprised that he's just getting nailed now because it seems like it's coming for everybody. The funny thing is, I wonder if I've ever been canceled because I have no idea if I was. Like I don't think I'm. Yeah, I don't think I've ever will gain the popularity for that to even be an option. But I can assure you that if I ever did, I'd have no idea what was happening.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
I was going to say, the last thing I would say here is like Elon could pretty much just like put you on retainer for a year. Yeah. That's how you should sell your services.
It wouldn't it wouldn't even be close to a dent, right? Like on their
No.
It wouldn't even show
I've thought about that before where I was like, if like let's say he bought you out for a month. Like he sees you every day, Monday to Sunday for a session for a month. That is less of his net worth than you and I going and getting a cup of coffee together tomorrow.
That's wild. Yeah.
Probably. I don't know the math. I haven't done the math. I'm assuming that's probably pretty darn accurate. Like, and he probably wins that by a landslide, actually. Like,
probably.
With the amount of chat that gets thrown. Anyways, let's transition here. I'm sure the people...
I hope I'm at least... I have to make one joke. I hope I'm at least like an artisan coffee. I'm not like a Dunkin' Donuts coffee. You're
at least like a $3.50 coffee.
Yeah,
you're not the like
good.
McDonald's on the go, like whatever it is.
That watered down
60
bullshit.
cents.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, we'll have to run the numbers.
Well, that's like, have you ever seen the story? Okay, this is the last thing we're going to talk about, people, and then we're actually going to talk about lifting things. As a quick preview, we are going to talk about the big three today: squat, bench, deadlift, and we want to focus on the difference in how we like to coach those movements for a powerlifter versus any of our other athletes And when you hear athlete, just like in parentheses, you're thinking human, because we think all humans are athlete. If you're a powerlifter, you're just kind of like a subcategorization of that. And it needs to be set up and coached differently. So we want to talk about some of the key differences. Before we get there, though, while we're on this topic, there's a really funny story. Actually, not a story. It's in a documentary on HBO, I think, of Warren Buffett. And he's driven the same route to work every day for whatever it is, 40, 50, 60 years. And he goes by the same McDonald's. And he gets McDonald's for breakfast every single morning. And he comes home from work the night before, and he always tells his wife what exact change needs to go in the cup holder in his car for when he goes to McDonald's the next morning. Because he gets one of 3 meals at McDonald's. One's like $1, one's like $1.75, the other's like $2.50, something like that. And he orders at McDonald's based off of the performance of the market the day before. So if the market had a good day, he splurges. He splurges for like a $3 and whatever meal at McDonald's. If it has a down day in the market, he only goes for like the dollar menu, whatever it is. I'm sitting here thinking like, oh my God, this dude is worth how much money? And it's like, but that's the thing though, right? Like he is who he is because that's the mindset. It's like he can't turn that off. That's just ingrained. But yeah, I thought that was a funny story.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like it.
Yeah, I'm like, Warren, you could just buy McDonald's.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah, how many
you can have as much as you want.
Yeah. Incredible.
Anyways, let's talk about the big 3. Squat, bench, dead, 3 lifts that really have a significant place in our hearts. And so I think what makes the most sense here is maybe we kind of take it lift by lift, and we can kind of go like, all right, let's start with the squat and let's talk about setting up the squat as a power lifter versus how we would think about setting up the squat for someone who's just more of an athlete. And then we can go bench, and then we can go dead.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good to me.
Cool. Let's start with the squat, and let's start with the powerlifting reference first in terms of like big rocks in terms of setup and execution of a squat for powerlifting with the one intentional goal of squatting as much weight as humanly possible.
Yeah, so I think first we need to understand the criteria, and there's really 2 criterion. You know, I don't know how to speak English. You guys know this, but so really the thing, we need to start with the knee straight. We need to get the hip crease below the knee joint, and then we need to stand back up. So that's like, I guess that's 3 things. And I guess there's one other thing is that you can't go, depending on the federation, I think that most federations would agree with this, is that you can't go back down once you start going up, which is weird, but it does happen sometimes. Like someone will start going up.
Olympic lifting. In Olympic lifting, you kind of get that little double hitch squat.
Yeah. So you can't do that, at least in the federation that I compete in. So that's basically it. Now, however you get there is really up to you. It doesn't really matter. The bar needs to be on your back. I don't know why you'd put it anywhere else, but you couldn't anyway if you wanted to. So that's really it. So we have to consider that first. Then there's all of the other technical things that go along with that. But like you said, the key here is we're trying to move as much weight as possible. So you're going to manipulate all other variables to make sure that you hit, basically the only criteria is that you drop that hip crease below the knee joint, or are in line with, depending on the federation that you compete in. And that's it. Like you just need to figure out how to do that. And I think that's where the discussion really begins. It's really not about this verticality of the pelvis necessarily, and the stacking of the rib cage and all the stuff that we like to talk about as being important for just general movement. That becomes, I would say, somewhat irrelevant. I wouldn't say it's completely irrelevant, and we can talk more about that, but I'll kind of open that back up to you, James.
Yeah. No, I think that with regard to that powerlifting squat, I think that we hit the nail on the head here is we have to think about the key difference in my mind is in one instance, I'm really putting a priority on the position of the pelvis and rib cage as kind of like my not necessarily my number one priority, but it's really, really high towards the top of the list. Like if we're training athletes and humans, the position of the pelvis and rib cage is huge, and I want to see vertical displacement of the pelvis. In powerlifting, you're almost very intentionally not doing those two things, right? Because in powerlifting, it's like you need to be like you're gonna low bar back squat, right? Like that's pretty much, yeah. It's like you're gonna low bar back squat, so it's not really a true squat per se. It's gonna be more of a glorified hinge / good morning, anyways. I don't know. Maybe if you want to talk about some of the nuances of the setup in that kind of like low bar position in terms of what you're looking for, from maybe like a coaching or a cueing standpoint. Like if you had somebody standing in front of you and you're trying to get them set up into like a really good low bar position, what are some of the things that you are looking for in coaching?
Yeah. So I like, this is one of these things where I'll say that I do like Mark Ripito and the way that he explains this, because he does a good job. I don't know why I said that. That's just such a dickhead thing to say, because a lot of times I don't agree with Mark Ripito, but I will say he was right about this stuff in the sense that the bar needs to stay over the midfoot, relatively so. And if you go somewhere out of that, you're going to just lose your balance, or you're going to be really highly disadvantaged. So when you go into a low bar position, you're naturally going to have to lean forward a little bit more just to maintain that bar over the center of mass. So with that, you can't just put the bar lower on your back and then just hope that it stays there by just gripping the shit out of the bar, which a lot of people do, and then they get into these issues with their wrists and their elbows and all that. So really what you're looking for is there should be this idea of like creating this shelf with the posterior delt primarily, where if you gotta push your elbow out into internal rotation a little bit, or push your humerus into internal rotation a little bit, which means your elbow is going to be going behind you, that should pop that posterior delt out a little bit. And if it doesn't pop your posterior delt out a little bit, you probably don't have posterior delts, and you should probably do some hypertrophy work for that. Yeah, you should probably take care of that, bro. So that's kind of where the bar for most people are going to sit. It's going to be somewhere between there and like the superior angle of the scap, and you kind of figure out what feels good for you there. But you should be able to pull that bar into your back. You should feel like you're able to use your lats to help to create that tension in your upper back and to just really stick that bar to your back. So that's the first thing, is just figuring out what the setup is going to be. It's not going to be on like right on the upper traps like it would be with most people, or in my case, directly on my squat tumor that I've created over time to help the bar sit there. So you want to find that position that's just a little bit lower. You can see some people that go even lower than that, which to me just, I guess if you're like had a super long torso or something and you were just really disadvantaged just from an anthropometric standpoint, then I guess that would be okay. But then you got to be able to deal with that position, which is just going to probably beat the crap out of your elbows and wrists and all that. So that's the first thing. And again, the reason that we're doing that is because we're going to allow the hips to take more of the load. We're going to get less of this moment arm at the knee and more of a moment arm at the hips. And I think that's better for most people in terms of strength, because they're just bigger muscles.
You can move more load.
Yeah, I mean,
you got some big guns back there, and it allows you to lift more weight.
It just allows you to lift more weight. And I think one other thing that it does that's actually useful is it does limit the depth. Because if you do a really good, we'll call it like a stacked squat, this vertical squat, you'll kind of just drop straight down, and it's almost like hard to control. Like if you're really in a good position, you're just gonna like drop ass to grass without even really trying to, and you don't really want to do that with that much load on your back. Like you're just going to reduce the amount of weight that you can lift ultimately. So it does, when you get yourself into that position where you lean forward a little bit more, you put your pelvis into a little bit more of an anterior tilt, it's like you're not really able to get that low anymore unless you were to go into a huge posterior tilt, and you'd see all this movement taking place in the lumbar spine, which you're not looking for either.
Yeah, I'm over here trying to like think through the logistics of like being in a low bar setup and trying to like posteriorly tilt my pelvis. I'm just like, that is really hard. That's like hard and it's uncomfortable.
The funny thing is that like, so if I think of the way that I set up personally for my lifts, for my low bar squat, is I actually do have to think about that a little bit. So I'll do it before I even unrack the bar, knowing that it's not going to stay that way. So I'm still thinking about trying to get the ribs back. I still want my center of mass back as much as I can, because if I just extend forward, I'm just going to end up on my toes. Like everything's going to be too far forward. So it's not like you just throw all of this stuff out the window, because if you go into a low bar position and you just let yourself extend like crazy, you're probably not going to hit depth. Like, so you don't want to have the fullest depth that you could possibly have, but you don't want, you can limit it so much that you don't even hit depth by the criteria in your organization. And that can definitely be an issue. So I actually still think about that when I set up. So I'm getting underneath the bar. I'll take a couple breaths there. I'll be thinking about exhaling and getting my ribs back. A little bit of a posterior tilt, knowing that it's not going to be like a full-on posterior tilt. I'm just going back to like quote-unquote neutral. I'm just getting out of a ton of extension essentially. And then from there, it's like I'm still trying to drop as vertically as possible, but I know that I'm not going to stay super vertical. Like there is going to be some forward lean. And that's going to, on the ascent, is going to be amplified even more. Because I think what happens there is that your quads are, I mean, you can always handle more weight under eccentric load than you can concentric, right? So I think on the way down, you're going to, and you'll see this with like the vast majority of people, if you've been I'm sure a lot of people watching this or listening to this have watched a lot of people squat. We're like total weirdos. Like it's a fucking squat. Like how exciting is it to watch? But I mean, how many thousands of squats have we watched? Like, oh my God, you got to see this guy's squat. Like it's the same damn thing. So, but it's funny. So we've seen enough of them. But if you're one of these people, you've seen enough of these things that you'll see when people come down that like it's whatever it is on the way down, it's more amplified on the way up. So you know, that's kind of what I'm thinking about as I'm squatting. It's like I want to be as vertical as possible. I know there's going to be more of a forward lean, but on the way down, I'm creating a greater moment arm at the knee. My knees are traveling traveling further forward on the way down than they are on the way up. And immediately when you start to come up out of the hole, the knees are going to shoot back and the hips are going to take over the rest of the way. And that in my mind, like I think a lot of people try to prevent that in their low bar squat. That's just taking advantage of leverage. Like that's allowing you to hit depth. That's kind of what you want. Yeah, like the vertical, like the relative verticality on the eccentric is going to allow you to hit depth, and then you're just going to let big muscles take over on the way out. And I think that's actually like, you know, if you have to do every single one of your squats like that from the bar all the way up, like I think you're going to run into some problems. But once it starts to get heavy, you're always going to see that knees are going to shoot back, hips are going to go up higher, and they're going to finish the lift. It's essentially a good morning, like from halfway up, right? Like and that's okay. Like that's I think where you run into a problem is where that is your only option. If you do your goblet squats like that, you do your front squats like that, you do your taking a shit squat like that. Like, I mean, I think that's where you get into some problems.
And that squat is what's going to stand in contrast to what I would call more of an athlete squat, which is where we're looking for far more of a, you know, vertical displacement of the pelvis as opposed to horizontal. Because in that low bar squat, as you mentioned, right, like I'm going to have to get a forward lean while we're thinking about trying to sit as like straight down as we can. We know that we're realistically going to be kind of like sitting back more. It turns into this like hybrid squat hinge pattern thing, but it's totally appropriate for the sport because that's what you need to do to lift as much load as possible, which is the goal. That is the point of that sport, right? For athletes, though, it's a little bit different because the goal isn't necessarily to just lift as much load as humanly possible. We're going to probably put a little bit more weight on the underlying quality of the movement pattern itself, right? And so that's where we want more vertical displacement of the pelvis. I want to see more of a vertical torso. I don't really want to see this like big forward lean. I want to see them try to keep their asshole underneath the top of their head and not have those hips totally shoot out, right? Because with these squat patterns, we're thinking safety bar squats, front squats. Obviously, like a hack squat or a pendulum squat are great if you have access to them. So it's a very different, it's a squatty squat. It's way more knee dominant, way more quad, right? But the reason that we like that, and I think we had a way earlier episode in the podcast with Ty Terrell, and he did a really good job talking about explaining this. Like with athletes, like we want to see an athlete that can squat in a phone booth, because if you can squat in a phone booth, that tells us a lot about, we're going to start using some larger words here, tells us a lot about triplanar control, your ability to have frontal and transverse motion, your ability to not be a rigid 2x4, right? But this is, again, the distinction. This is why I hate when people just get black and white on this. Like, being a rigid 2x4 is probably a good thing in powerlifting because it's going to help you lift as much weight as possible. But for an athlete who needs to not only be strong, but you need to be fluid, you need to be able to move well, you need to be powerful, you need to be able to cut and rotate, that vertical squat is just so much better for what we're trying to get there, right? Like, I'm still going to get really nice quad hypertrophy and quad strength, glutes. I mean, hamstrings are still doing a majority of the work on the eccentric portion of that lift, right? Like, you're getting tons of hamstrings controlling the lowering portion, adductors, etc. on board there. And then like we'll even throw wedges in there a lot with our people because we want to really see that vertical squat pattern. Plus, you get far less beat up that way. Because I think, as you mentioned, right, that low bar back squat, great for moving as much load as possible, not so great with long-term repeated exposure. Whereas if I can get you a really nice, good-looking vertical squat, more of an athletic squat, like we can really crank volume up on that quite high. You don't get nearly as beat up. You don't get nearly as much hip back stuff going on, right? And so that for me is the distinction to where like the athlete, I really want to prioritize that stack position. I really want to prioritize ribs down, pelvis under, and I want a squat pattern that's going to really reinforce that happening and taking place. And a powerlifter, we're okay with fringing that line because the goal is slightly different. I don't know if you feel that was a fair summary.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll say like even for that powerlifter, I think there is a time for working on that other kind of squat. Just call it. Like there's no reason why they have to exist like that all of the time, just because that is their goal. And I'm sure, at a certain level, like when you're highly, highly specialized and you're actually going to do this at the greatest level, I guess you could make an argument for that. But even then, I would say, I think that these people can demonstrate some other movements in these patterns that are going to be really
keep them
beneficial.
Healthy.
I think it really does keep them healthy. I think I don't see it being a negative in any way. Like you're not, just because you do a more vertical squat once a week, it's not like you're going to forget how to low bar squat. Like that pattern is pretty innate, man. Like it's like you obviously need to practice it and everything, but it's pretty like teach someone how to squat for the first time. They're going to show you a low bar squat. Like if you just let them do it, like people know how to do that. Like you can very easily figure it out. So I don't think that you're going to lose it in any way. At the very least, you just get a different sensory experience when you're doing these other exercises. And I think from a pain perspective, that can be really great, where people can walk out of the gym feeling much better. And then like that's worst case scenario. And then a best case scenario is that they're actually working some different tissues in a different way. And we know that just overuse over time of the same damn thing all the time, that tends to be when things go. So
variability, right? Like that's kind of the word that keeps coming back here. Like you need some level of variability. Like there's no such thing as good posture. The human body as an organism doesn't like really anything that just stays the same for extended periods of time. It needs change. It needs phase change. And the reason I like the phase change word is because that tracks all the way up from the organism down to like the chemical level. When you start looking at like resonance bonds and all these other things happening there, like they want to have ways of passing and moving electrons around so they're not stuck in one rigid structure. And like we need the same thing, And I think that the one quick note here, and then we'll go talk about bench press, which is this kind of more rigid 2x4 thing. And, I think most powerlifters at this point have realized that they need these other inputs in their training at certain times throughout the calendar year, so that they can stay healthy and feel good and put out the type of training volume they need to put out to actually continue to get strong and not just, feel like a dumpster fire along the way. But a really, really well periodized training program will take care of that patterning by itself. The act of peaking, the act of getting more specific in training will inherently pattern you to be more prepared for when you step on the platform. Like I've had this conversation before about sprinters and other athletes where it's just, there's that conversation of, if you take Usain Bolt and have him run the 100 meter 100 times and you like get him on a table and measure all the joint angles and everything before every single race, there's probably like an optimal underlying position and pattern that he walks in with where he is at his peak, right? And so then the question becomes, well, his job is to run in a straight line as fast as he can between these two other little white lines. He doesn't need to be able to fucking turn and rotate. He's got to run straight. So if I give him things that help him turn and rotate, I'm probably gonna make him slower, right? But that's where he does need some of those things when he's not trying to peak to go to the Olympics. But when he is trying to peak for the Olympics, the programming will naturally take care of the decreased variability itself. Just an important concept there.
Okay. One more quick note on the squat, very quick. Because we didn't cover the stance. I think just naturally your stance is going to end up going out wider. Again, that is to take advantage of just trying to meet that one criteria of getting the hip joint below the hip crease below the knee joint. You just don't have to move as far. If you bring your feet out wider, like you're just doing less work. So that works pretty well for that. And again, it also kind of restricts the range of motion where you don't get too low. And then if we're looking at more of an athletic type of squat, we're probably gonna have more narrow stance with a straighter feet, depending on what they can actually accomplish with their body.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. That powerlifting squat is gonna be wider stance. Toes are gonna be out a little bit farther because you can't go wide stance with fucking toes pointing straight ahead. Like, just not going to happen. Like, it's going to be wide stance, toes are going to be out. And, like, it's a skill. Powerlifting is a skill, right? And you're trying to, I think, as you mentioned, you're trying to move the bar literally as – I'm trying to think, how do I want to say this? As least far as possible.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Like, this is the qualification for – this is how far the bar has to move for the lift to count. You don't want to lift it any farther than that exact qualification. Otherwise, you're wasting effort and work. It's like – no one in powerlifting, you don't get bonus points because you went deeper in your squat. It's like
definitely not.
So I think that's an important distinction on the stance. Powerlifting, we're gonna intentionally get you more wide. Athletes, we're gonna intentionally kind of bring you in a little bit narrower, more feet underneath shoulders, toes straighter ahead, depending on how you can manage that. And again, that just depends kind of what it looks like and feels like.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about bench press because I think that's the other one where we're gonna see really big differences. I really don't think we're gonna see much differences in terms of the technique and execution on a deadlift, on a straight bar deadlift. Like, there are only so many ways I'm going to conventional straight bar deadlift.
Yep.
It's just like the choice of the deadlift pattern, I think, is what changes, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let's start with that powerlifting bench press first, right? Because I think everybody listening hopefully has seen a powerlifting bench press, right? And the reason I wanted to do this episode is because we still see people kind of like crossing these lines incorrectly. And so you still see people training athletes and coaching them in the big three like they're powerlifters. And then you still see like the vice versa thing happening where people are trying to tell powerlifters not to do it that way.
Yeah.
And like we gotta really appreciate this conversation. And so that powerlifting bench press, right? Big arch. Like, you are as far from a stack as you can get, my friend.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like no stack allowed.
Yeah.
Get those ribs out, baby. Poke those things up to the sky and be proud about it.
I love taking people through the beginning phases of training and teaching them, because we're always having to reinforce that pattern, like teaching them how to do the stack and manage that. That's the hardest part. Like we're always trying to do that as the foundation. I love going to a composition style bench press after doing that if I decide that I'm going to program for that person, because I'll be like, hey, you remember all the stuff that we just worked on for like the last few months? Forget about all of that. That's over now. Like, just arch away, do exactly what you wanted to do on day one. It's going to be awesome. So yeah, it's in the rules. You can do it. So why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Again, right. We're trying to move the bar the shortest distance possible.
Totally. There's no better example of that than the bench press.
Yeah, some of the women in powerlifting
it's
like, I think the bar moves 2 inches.
I'm like quite literally. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I don't know how you manage to keep your ass on the bench and be where you are, and like it's a glorified like just elbow extension. It's just bump done.
Yeah, I don't. it gets so silly. Yeah, when you start doing like the wider grip, because a lot of like I would assume all federations have some restrictions on how wide you can go with your grip, but most of these people will take it out as far as they possibly can and then do that arch, and it literally is like a 2-inch range of motion. And it just, yeah, at some point it gets so silly. I'm just like, can we just skip this part? Like, this is just kind of silly, but it's in the rules. It's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. So core elements here on setting up the bench press as a power lifter. We're going for a big arch, kind of like realistically the biggest that you can get, pretty much, right? Hips, ass have to stay on the bench. They can't come off. Shoulder blades, you are very intentionally going to drive those shoulder blades down and back into the bench and really set those things pretty hard, right? Like set those shoulder blades so that like we're kind of very intentionally limiting degrees of freedom here on purpose. And then I think foot placement, you see some differences. I think some people like really walking feet back underneath and they're almost on their toes. Other people like being able to still have their feet flat and bench press that way. I think that's kind of like a personal preference thing, isn't it?
Well, so some of it does have to do with the organization, the federation that you're competing in. So for instance, in the USAPL or IFPF, I which are not associated anymore, I guess. There's some kind of drama. I don't even know what's going on with Joe Rogan, so I have no idea what's going on with these guys. But they require that the heels stay on the ground the whole time. And then I think they may be like the only federation that does that. And then the other ones will do heels up. So I think probably even within that, you have some people that will choose to do heels down. I think that most people feel stronger with heel. That heel up just allows you basically to get into more of an arch. Like you can just get your feet back further. So, but the leg drive is going to be very different with that. I think I haven't played around with that very much, but when I've watched people do it, it doesn't seem to be as prominent. The leg drive is a little bit trickier.
I don't really know how you really get a leg drive from that. From like where you are, you can kind of like extend your knee a little bit. You can try to get like knee extension.
That's how I've heard people describe it. It's almost just like you're going to like kind of, it's almost like you're trying to kick your heel down towards the ground. And that's going to give you a little bit of pop there, but it's definitely not going to be as big of a deal as with the flat foot. So I think at that point you figure out, what you're like. I'm personally like pretty good at getting leg drive out of my bench. So that's, I would probably continue with feet flat, even if I was able to lift them up. So yeah, that's a big thing. Like, I think you'd still, to some degree, like, it would start the same with either whatever type of bench you're trying to do. Like, you're going to start from the floor or the bench if your feet are on the bench, if we're talking about the other kind of bench, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But those things are probably the same. Like, you're going to want to push into whatever you have underneath your feet, get a nice solid foundation. The difference is that your feet are probably going to be further back. You're going to be more arched. Like you mentioned with the upper back, like, you're intentionally trying to limit movement as much as possible through we don't want to see a whole lot of scapular movement. Like, you're really trying to just lock that down, which is not really how that scapular humeral rhythm is supposed to work. You're just cutting out scapula at that point. But that's for a particular reason. And you're really trying to use your lats to drive your thorax forward into more extension and create more compression in the upper back, and to reduce that range of motion even more. As you're coming down, you're like trying to lift your chest up to the bar. It's not like you're actively pulling the bar down and it's almost like you're doing a row on the way down, and again, trying to limit that range of motion even more, and just create that almost like a slingshot effect by like really tightening up the upper back and then just like releasing that along with that leg drive. So yeah, it's once we get away from the feet, it's like kind of a lot different, I think, than a regular than the bench press that we would use for teaching someone how to reach well or to build hypertrophy. Even most likely, it's going to be a lot different. Yeah,
I think an important point there, a similarity between the two patterns, not between the two patterns, between the two lifts. Like, you need to be set before the load gets in your hands. I've got an athlete in the team. We've been working on this. He's been struggling to get really good like leg position and leg drive. He's not a power lifter. He's one of our athletes. Again, everyone listening, if you're a human, you're an athlete. We call all of our clients athletes. So he, like, while he's benching, you see his feet kind of like shit, like moving around, like on the floor. And I'm like, bro, you can't have leg drive. Like, you're all over the place here. And so we're working on it. He's doing a really good job making adjustments, but that was kind of the biggest thing that I told him this week. Like, hey, like you need to be totally set, 100% locked in before that weight comes out of the rack. Because once it comes out of the rack, it's kind of a free for all. Like you're not going to reclaim position under load. Like you've got to be set and locked in, and then we get a little handoff to get the weight, and now we're working. But if that's not set first, you're never going to get it later on, right? And so, yeah, clearly then if we think about an athlete bench press, the biggest difference is the arch, right? We're taking that arch away intentionally. I don't want you to have this massive extension. I want you to focus on that stack. I want ribs down and pelvis under. Like, I'm probably going to see, hey, like maybe you can have like a really small little arch. I'm okay with, but generally speaking, I want your back essentially on the bench all the way down to your sacrum. Whereas in powerlifting, we're intentionally trying to get that lumbar spine and back up off the bench to create the arch. And athletes, like I want your back pretty much flush with the bench all the way down, right? In terms of foot position, I want your whole foot pushing into the floor. I want you to feel heel. I want you to feel everything. I'm probably going to put your feet up on like 45-pound bumper plates because, you know, it can be really hard to get in that position and not have to arch due to the hip extension requirements. So I can bring the 45-pound bumper plate, elevate your feet slightly, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, awesome. I got a great stack. Ribs are down, pelvis tuck under, back is Velcroed to the bench all the way across. I got good leg drive going in here. I'm really locked in. And I'm not going to aggressively cue you to just like lock your shoulder blades either. I'm going to let those things probably like move and do a little bit of work since the ribs are there for them to actually work off of, since I'm not driving this massive extension pattern.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Like that's basically all the points that I would have. There was one more thing that I'll try to remember that I was going to say because I'm forgetting right now. But well, there's two things I would say. Like I said before. Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember what it is. First thing, you probably still can think about being active on the way down with your back. Like you can actually like think about pulling that bar down. I don't think that's going to hurt in any way. You just don't want to do that as you're arching. It's just like if you do like a good regular row, like you're not arching as you go. You're just pulling with your lats, right? So you can definitely do that.
You're just getting retraction, right? Like you're just getting retraction and protraction out of the scap because like as you row the weight down, I get retraction, and then as I drive the weight up, I should be getting protraction as those scaps kind of wrap around the shoulder. Sorry, as those scaps wrap around the rib cage a little bit.
Yep. So, and then the other thing that I was going to say is, especially for people that have done a arch bench press for their entire lifting career, you don't need to touch your chest just because you're doing a bench press. You don't necessarily need to touch your chest. If you have no shoulder extension and no shoulder horizontal abduction, like you're probably not going to be able to touch your chest with the bar without going into this humeral glide in the front, like that anterior glide of the shoulder, and you'll feel that a lot. So a lot of people, when they do feet on the bench or feet up bench press where they eliminate that arch, they're like, oh, it just fucking kills my shoulders. Well, that's because you're grinding the shit out of the front of the shoulder. Like you're just going, it's too much range of motion. You don't have that availability. You just didn't know it because you're reducing the range of motion by 6 inches by putting your feet on the ground and arching your back. So you're still getting the same amount of stretching out of your pecs and all that. You're probably getting more out of your pecs with the feet flat. You're just feeling it a lot in your shoulders because you're going further down than you actually have the capability for.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good point. So if I go, it's slightly different for me. So if I keep my feet, if I do 45-pound bumpers, and again, it's just kind of a question. Like if I'm going to go 45-pound bumpers, put my feet on top of, I'm going to be prioritizing load more than if I put my feet up on the bench. Obviously, I get more leg drive. If my feet are on 45-pound bumpers, I can still get to my chest because I still have a little bit of extension there, right? Like it's just not as exaggerated as it would if I'm intentionally trying to power lift. If my feet come up on the bench though, and I'm truly in this stacked position where it's like total Velcro to the bench all the way across, then yeah, I probably get about to an inch within my chest, and that's where I'm done. It's just you can feel it too, but that's the thing. Like you can feel it, like as you row the weight down to yourself, you're gonna feel like, okay, like my shoulder blades and shoulders are done are done moving. Like I literally cannot retract and go any farther. The only way I'm going to get more range of motion is to just dump and do this weird thing where I'm going to get this anterior roll and glide out of my humerus. Right. So yeah, I was actually Tyler, who you met at the last training camp because you guys worked on his squat. We were talking about this the other day because he's been doing more of that feet elevated pec focused bench press. And he was complaining about that shoulder pain. I was like, yeah, well, we probably just got to cut that range of motion a little bit because you're just not going to get to your chest in this pattern. It's like you're totally locked in with the ribs down, pelvis under. It's going to be really hard for you to it's going to be really difficult to get all the way to your chest because that shoulder extension requirement at that point is just so extreme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you'll feel it too. Like you're just going to feel a lot more pec and a lot less shoulders. I don't really know where that's a bad thing.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
and for people, I'm sure people are wondering, and so I'll make the distinction super quick. So you can do a feet on the bench press. Mm-hmm. I know that you like to do that for more of a pec focused bench press. A lot of times I've seen that in your programs, which I love. And then the other time that we'll use that is if we really want to 100% prioritize movement. Mm-hmm. If I really want to kind of remove all these other extraneous factors and I really want to force this athlete in front of me to maintain and manage the stack position because they suck at it, we'll just go feet on bench press for a while until you prove that you can do it, and then we'll walk your feet back down.
Yep.
So it's really kind of a question of what your priority is. Do I want to prioritize this position more, or do I potentially want to give them a little bit more leeway, put feet on 45-pound bumpers and chase the load more?
Yep.
Or is it a specific hypertrophy goal, like I'm trying to get something more pec focused, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. I also like that as a progression back into extension, because we talk about extension a lot of times, about it being like this horrible thing that we're trying to avoid. And it's really not the case. Like you're going to go into extension on certain things. It's available movement, just like you said at the beginning of this. Like posture, there's no good posture. Like there's just different postures. So I actually do like, for someone who's like a little bit extension intolerant. Did I say extension? I don't know what I just said. Extension intolerant. Yeah, that's actually a nice progression to like put them feet on the bench. Like everything I'm going to do with that person is going to reinforce the thorax over the pelvis, and then if I want to start, just because at some point in their life they're going to go into extension, I think it's a really nice way to introduce it again, where it's like there's really not a whole lot of risk there. Like they're able to push their feet into the ground, they can squeeze their butt a little bit, so they're kind of getting a nice base there. They're going into a little bit of extension, but it's not the way that gravity is resisting when you're laying down on your back. It's very different than when you're standing up, so it tends to not really bug people anymore. So I think, because eventually if you have someone who really has a lot of pain in extension, you do want them to be able to do something there at some point. So I do like that as a progression as well, like coming back from an issue like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because extension does get poo-pooed, and I think we do a decent job in this podcast whenever we talk about it, trying to remind people that it is necessary, it is okay, it is only a problem if you can't get out of it.
Yeah.
That's the only time extension is an issue. If you extend and you are incapable of if you can't not extend, like if that's your only option, if you can't get out of extension, it's a problem.
Yeah.
But like, if you want to be strong and you want to be powerful and you want to have a little oomph, you better be able to extend. If you can't, you're going to be about as impressive as a just like wet, damp paper towel, right? Like it just is what it is. Like, I'm sorry. Like when it's go time, you're going to extend. Extension is power, but you got to be able to get out of it also.
I forget who it was. I feel like it was someone at iFast or something, somewhere related to that. That's what's coming to my head. But the person was like, show me the person who's not an extension, and I'll show you the weakest person in the room.
It was probably Bill.
Maybe, yeah.
It was probably Bill, yeah.
Probably. I feel like it was one of those guys, yeah. And I was like, yeah, that seems about right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It is.
It's true.
It's totally true. Yeah. Totally true. Sorry, people. Sorry, we're not sorry. Okay, last one here. Let's hammer this one real quick, because then I need to go consume some dinner. I'm just losing all these gains over here.
Can't have that.
I think that I wanted to save the deadlift for last year also, just because I think that, right, we're not going to talk sumo, because that's its own beast entirely, and I've never pulled sumo, you don't pull sumo, we're not going to go there. We're talking just a straight up conventional straight bar deadlift. I can't really think of any enormous differences in terms of how I would coach that for a power lifter versus an athlete. What I would change is just the exercise selection itself. For the athlete, I would trap bar deadlift you, I would high handle trap bar deadlift you instead of straight barring you. But if all we had was a straight bar, I would coach Q and approach that the same way, because there's not really many ways that we can, like, that one's pretty cut and dry, right? Like, I can't think of any way that I would really adjust that.
Yeah, I totally
assuming
agree.
that you can, like, get down to the bar and everything's fine. I don't need to, like, elevate the bar for you. Like, that's out of the consideration. But
yeah, I think when you're coaching anyone who's not a powerlifter, what you're coaching is the hinge. You're coaching the hinge movement. And the deadlift from the floor, for some people, is just a hinge if they have these freaky long arms, and it's just not fair. That, like, it really is just a hinge for those people. Then for people who don't have that, then it ends up being a hinge plus a little bit of knee flexion. Where and even if you are just like purely a hinge, like there's still this, you have to think about pushing into the floor, like that's initiating the movement off the ground, that's breaking inertia. But aside, yeah, that's the difference. It's just like, yeah, if you're coaching athletes, you're probably purely doing hinges. So it's going to be a high bar, trap bar typically, or it's going to be an RDL or 45-degree hip extension, something like that. And then, yeah, if you're talking powerlifting, it's a deadlift. It's almost kind of a different thing in a sense, but very similar.
Yeah. I don't think we really need to belabor that one.
No.
That one's super straightforward.
Yeah.
It's like, if you only have access to a straight bar, then you'll do it the same way if you're a powerlifter or an athlete. If you have access to more tools, I would recommend probably getting on a high handle trap bar if you're an athlete. It just makes way more sense.
Yep.
Because, like, we're chaining a hinge there, because this is where it all fits back in, right? Like, we think about different patterns that allows me to train the athlete on the actual opposite ends of the spectrum of a squat and a hinge. Because we have an athlete squat, which is very vertical, and we have an athlete hinge, which is like super hingy. A high handle trap bar and then a safety squat bar with a wedge allows me to be on the outskirts or the sides of this squat hinge spectrum, and to not live like in the murky middle as much. You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
I'll give one pro tip before you completely go catabolic and lose all your muscle. I will say that on a whether you're like athlete, powerlifter, whatever, one of the biggest things that I see as an issue with the deadlift, especially for people that have back pain when they deadlift, is that they sit their shoulders back too far. They want to sit their hips down too low, and they're starting. If you were to draw a line from their shoulder straight down, it's like behind the bar.
Yep.
Get your shoulders in front of the bar. And so a lot of times when you see those people that set up with the shoulders behind the bar, it's like two movements. Like they lift the bar up, their hips shoot up first, and then they pull through. And I think that's just like the hips kind of correcting for where they want to be.
Yeah.
Just start with your hips up a little bit higher, your shoulders in front of the bar, and you have the ability to just push into the floor and fucking lean back. Like, and it's like all one smooth
It's going to
motion.
rip off the floor.
Yeah. It's like, I've seen that help so many times. That was like the big correction that I made for myself when I was in a lot of back pain that was from deadlifting that way before. So I will say, like, that can be really useful. So film yourself and watch from the side and see where you're at.
It's not a squat.
Don't try to squat it.
Your shoulder, and it's not an Olympic lift.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the
I think
other
that's
one.
where a lot of it comes from.
Setup,
very different.
That setup, hugely different. Like, that is an Olympic lifting setup in the bottom. I've got one guy in the training team right now, actually, who he's done some Olympic lifting in the past. That's actually the biggest thing that we've been working on with him in his deadlift. You still see when he sets up in the bottom of the deadlift, it looks very much like an Olympic lift setup where, like, hips are low, his chest is up, right? Like, his letters on, like, his shirt are almost pointing at the wall in front of him.
Yeah.
And the first thing that happens, like, the bar doesn't even move. He goes to lift, and it's like hips shoot up and correct, and then we're going. I'm like, bro, just, like, take your hips. Imagine I was in front of you, and I just, like, was pushing your knees back, and you just, like, stayed tight and let your hips come up as I push your knees back.
Totally.
That's where we want to get to. Then we want to get a nice leg drive out of that position.
Yep. Perfect.
Because, like, otherwise you're just you kind of just dump into your low back in that
feels terrible
position.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Never feels good.
It's horrendous.
I think the people that can get away with it are like 400 plus pounds, and they're really tall. They seem to be, because that's how a lot of strongmen deadlift, but it doesn't
Thor
look like
does
that.
have and Brian Shaw. And Brian Shaw both kind of have that more vertical, like, they get really tall on their deadlift, but at the same time, they're 6'10", 400 something pounds.
Guess what? There's going to be a lot of differences between you and Brian Shaw. That includes your deadlift, like, setup, right? So yeah, that's where I see a lot of it coming from, I think. But yeah, I would make that adjustment if you're someone who has an issue with deadlifts. But.
Yeah, a way that I like to think about that is, those those little like bird things that you put on your desk that tend
Oh
to,
yeah,
like, fall
I
over,
always use that.
and they dunk their beak into the water.
the bird in the
I love
windowsill.
that analogy. I'm like, you're just gonna be that bird, just like
Yep.
get tight at the top, and then just fall forward over. Let your chest fall out over your toes, and then once you're there, just kind of squat down slowly until you get to the bar.
Yep, yeah. Your hips go back, chest goes down. Like that's it.
Yeah, and then we're there. Fantastic, beautiful, man. This was good. I hope people found this helpful. Yeah, folks, I'm gonna go eat some dinner. So I hope that you guys have a fantastic rest of your week. Ryan, man, thank you as always.
Thank you,
James.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.